It was just another rainy afternoon at a small-town diner, one of those places where the coffee's always hot and the booths have seen better days. Inside, Emily wiped down tables with a kind of quiet determination that only comes from someone used to long shifts and short paychecks. She was a waitress, barely making ends meet, holding on to hope one day at a time. Most people just saw her as another face in the crowd, someone they could overlook. But today, Emily was about to make a decision that would change everything, not just for her, but for a family she didn't even know. As she cleared away the dishes from a couple that had left in a hurry, the front door opened again. A man stepped in, soaked from the downpour, with two children clinging to his sides and a tired-looking woman just behind him. They looked out of place, not from around here. You could tell by the way they scanned the room, lost, anxious, and unsure what to do next. Emily smiled, offered them a seat, and brought over a few menus, even though she could already tell by their body language. They weren't going to be able to afford much. Still, she treated them like any other customer. With kindness, with dignity. She didn't know their story. She didn't ask. But something about the way the kids quietly whispered to each other, or the way the mother kept glancing at the door like she was expecting something, anything, to go wrong, tugged at Emily's heart. When it came time to pay, the father hesitated. He checked his wallet, then his phone. His shoulders slumped. And in that moment, without thinking twice, Emily stepped in. She paid the bill herself. It was more than she could afford, but she did it anyway. Because sometimes you just help people. No expectations. No strings attached. What Emily didn't realize, though, was who that man really was. Just months earlier, she had lost her job at a high-end restaurant in the city, laid off without warning, struggling ever since. And the man sitting across from her now, the one she just helped without a second thought, he was the CEO of the very company that had let her go. The same man who had signed her termination letter. But in this small diner, far from corporate boardrooms and polished office towers, fate had brought them face to face again, and he recognized her, just not right away. What happens next will leave you speechless. The man sat there, quietly stirring his coffee as the kids picked at the pancakes in front of them. His wife offered Emily a weak smile, barely embarrassed, whispering a soft thank you as if she wasn't sure she deserved the kindness. The man kept glancing at Emily, his brow furrowed like he was trying to place her face. Something about her was familiar, but he couldn't quite put his finger on it. Emily moved through the diner like she always did, refilling drinks, checking on customers, pretending everything was fine. But inside, she was tired. Rent was due in a few days, her car was barely running, and tips had been low all week. Still, she couldn't ignore the look in that family's eyes. She knew what it felt like to be stuck, to not know where your next meal was coming from. That's why she paid their bill, not for recognition, just because it felt like the right thing to do. Back at the table, the man finally asked, "Do we know each other?" Emily paused. For a second, her heart sank. She didn't want to talk about the past, especially not here in front of his kids. She shook her head politely. "I don't think so," she said with a smile, trying to keep things light. But inside, she knew exactly who he was, and it stung. His name was Daniel, CEO of one of the biggest upscale dining groups in the city. Emily had worked for one of his restaurants for nearly 2 years. She was a good employee, showed up early, stayed late, never complained. But when the company downsized, she was let go without even a proper goodbye. No severance, no explanation, just a cold email and an empty locker. That job was supposed to be her big break, a chance to move up, maybe even manage someday. But just like that, it was gone. And now here he was, sitting in her section, drinking coffee she poured, eating a meal she paid for. Daniel still hadn't figured it out. Not yet. His mind was too full of other worries. He and his family had been stranded on the highway for hours before they were towed into town. They'd missed a business meeting, lost their luggage, and maxed out one of their credit cards at a gas station. He was too proud to ask for help and too stubborn to admit they were in trouble. But something about the waitress's voice, Her eyes, it was all starting to come back. And when it finally hits him, who she really is, it'll change everything. Daniel kept glancing over, trying not to stare, but the curiosity was starting to take over. He leaned in and whispered something to his wife. She looked over at Emily, then back at him, shaking her head like he was imagining things. But he wasn't. There was something about her voice, the way she carried herself, that tugged at a memory buried under months of stress and boardroom decisions. He just couldn't place it. Not yet. Emily, meanwhile, tried to focus on her work. But her hands were shaking a little more now. She didn't think he'd recognize her. Not here, not dressed in a worn-out uniform with her hair pulled back and tired eyes. She figured she was just another face to him, someone easily forgotten. That was the thing about people like Daniel. They made decisions that changed lives without ever really looking at the people those choices affected. She hadn't expected to ever see him again, especially not like this. In the back of the diner, the cook, Joe, an old friend who'd taken a chance on her when she was desperate, called out another order. Emily snapped back to reality and took the plate, forcing a smile as she dropped it off at a nearby table. But she could feel the tension building. She could feel his eyes on her. And she knew the truth was getting closer to the surface. What Emily didn't know was that Daniel's life hadn't been smooth since the layoffs. The company had faced backlash, not that he ever told anyone publicly. Profits dipped, staff morale plummeted, and there were whispers about poor leadership, about people being treated like numbers. He'd felt the pressure, but he always pushed forward. That's what CEOs were supposed to do. But sitting here now, watching someone he might have heard offer his family kindness when they had nothing to give in return, it was eating at him. At the same time, back in the kitchen, Joe noticed the tension too. He peeked through the serving window and saw Emily moving slower than usual. When he caught sight of the family at the table, something in his expression changed. He recognized the man. Joe used to be a line cook in one of Daniel's restaurants 2 years ago. He knew all about the layoffs, knew what Emily went through. And now he wondered, was this just a coincidence, or was fate putting something in motion? Outside, the storm hadn't let up. Rain tapped against the windows like a ticking clock, building pressure in the room. Emily took a deep breath, trying to steady herself, because she could tell something was coming, something big. The rain outside grew heavier, drumming against the diner's windows like a countdown. Inside, the air felt thick with unspoken words and uneasy glances. Daniel sat back in his chair, a mix of confusion and guilt clouding his eyes. Every time Emily moved around the room, every time she smiled at a customer or wiped a table, he felt that pull, like a distant echo of the past coming closer, louder. He wanted to believe it was just a trick of his mind, but deep down he knew better. Emily caught his gaze once again. Her smile faltered for a moment before she quickly looked away. She was tired of being the invisible worker, the one who got laid off without explanation, the one who struggled to survive day by day. Yet here she was, paying for a stranger's meal out of kindness, not knowing the weight that stranger carried or the power he held. It was like their worlds had collided in this small, quiet diner, and neither was prepared for the fallout. Daniel's wife, sensing the tension, gave him a gentle nudge. "Maybe we should go," she whispered, but he shook his head, as if waiting for something he couldn't name. The kids fidgeted, sensing the unease in the air, but too young to understand why grown-ups were suddenly so quiet. Emily wiped her hands on her apron, trying to stay calm, but her mind was racing. Could he really be the man who fired her? Was this some kind of cruel twist of fate? She thought about all the nights she lay awake, worrying about bills, wondering how she'd keep her little apartment, dreaming about a future that seemed further away every day. And now here he was, sitting just feet away, unaware of a storm brewing inside her. Joe, the cook, watched from the kitchen window, wiping his hands on a towel. He knew Emily's story. He knew Daniel's too. This wasn't just a coincidence. Something was about to break, and it was only a matter of time before everything came rushing out. Daniel finally stood up, clearing his throat. His eyes locked onto Emily's one last time. "Wait," he said softly, but the words hung in the air, heavy and uncertain. Emily paused, her heart pounding. The diner seemed to grow quieter, the noise of the storm fading into the background. It was as if the whole world had stopped, waiting for what would happen next. Would he recognize her now? Would she confront him? Or would the moment slip away like so many others before it? The tension was unbearable. The story was far from over. Daniel's voice barely broke the quiet hum of the diner as he said, "Wait." Emily froze in place, the words hitting her like a wave. Her heart pounded louder than the rain outside. She slowly turned toward him, eyes wide with a mix of hope and fear. For a brief second, she thought he might finally see her, not just as a waitress, not just as a stranger, but as the person whose life he had changed. But then, instead of recognition, Daniel's face twisted in confusion. I don't think I've ever seen you here before," he stammered. Emily blinked, her hopes slipping away, replaced by a strange unease. Had she been wrong? Was she just imagining the connection? Before she could respond, the diner door swung open again, and a sharp voice cut through the room. "Daniel? There you are." A woman stepped in, soaking wet and holding a folder tightly in her hands. She looked to be in her early 40s, dressed sharply in a business suit that contrasted with the worn boots and faded wallpaper. "Karen," Daniel said, his voice a mix of relief and annoyance. "What are you doing here?" Karen gave Emily a quick, appraising glance before turning her attention back to Daniel. "We need to talk. Now." Emily's stomach twisted. Who was this woman, and why was Daniel suddenly so tense? The family at the table shifted nervously, sensing something was wrong. The kids clung to their mother, eyes wide and silent. Karen stepped closer to Daniel, lowering her voice. "The board just got word that the media is sniffing around about the layoffs. They want answers, and your name keeps coming up." She glanced at Emily, a flicker of recognition crossing her face. "This is the place, isn't it? The diner." Daniel's jaw tightened. "It's not the time, Karen." But Karen wasn't done. "It has to be. If this story gets out the wrong way, the company could lose everything. And you, Daniel, could lose more than just your job." Emily felt a chill run down her spine. Suddenly, this wasn't just about a struggling waitress or a CEO paying for a meal. It was bigger, much bigger. The layoffs, the company's troubles, the family stranded in the rain. It all seemed tangled in something far more complicated than she had realized. Joe peeked out from the kitchen, eyes flickering between Daniel and Karen. He had heard rumors about the company's problems, but had no idea it had reached this level of crisis. The tension in the diner was palpable, every customer suddenly aware that this wasn't just a small-town story anymore. Daniel looked at Emily again, this time with something like desperation in his eyes. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen," he said quietly. "Believe me." Emily wanted to say something, to ask why, to demand answers. But before she could, Karen pulled Daniel toward the door. "We have to go, now." As they left, Emily was left standing in the middle of the diner, holding the weight of a secret she never saw coming, one that could change everything for everyone involved. Daniel hesitated by the door, his eyes locked on Emily one last time. The weight of everything, the layoffs, the family's struggle, the chaos at the company, pressed heavily on him. Then, as Karen pulled him gently but firmly outside, he turned and said, "Emily, wait. There's something you need to know." Inside the diner, Emily stood frozen, her mind racing. The storm outside seemed to pause as if waiting for the moment to unfold. She didn't expect an apology, but she hoped for honesty. And finally, that moment came. Daniel returned, alone this time. His face was tired, but there was something different, something softer. "Emily," he said quietly, "I want to apologize for what happened to you. When I made those decisions, I didn't think about the people behind the jobs. I thought it was just business." Emily looked down, swallowing the lump in her throat. "It wasn't just business for me," she whispered. "I lost more than a job. I lost hope." Daniel nodded. "I know. And that's why I'm here now. I want to make it right." The diner fell silent as Daniel explained that he had started pushing for changes in the company, better support for employees, fairer layoffs, and programs to help people get back on their feet. He wanted Emily to be part of that change, not as an employee of his corporation, but as a voice, someone who understood the real impact of those decisions. Emily was stunned. Could she trust him? After everything, was this just another empty promise, or was it real? Before she could answer, Karen's voice cut through the moment again, this time on Daniel's phone. He glanced at the screen, then back at Emily. "There's more. The board's meeting was postponed, but the media is still circling. If they find out about this conversation, it could blow up everything." Suddenly, the weight of the situation crashed down on both of them. Daniel wasn't just fighting for his company anymore. He was fighting for a chance to fix the mistakes he made, and for Emily, a chance to rebuild her life. Then, just as the tension seemed to reach its peak, Emily's phone buzzed in her pocket. She glanced down, and her eyes widened. It was a message from an unknown number. "I know who you really are, Emily, and this is far from over." The diner, once a place of quiet kindness, now felt like the center of a storm that was just beginning. Both Emily and Daniel realized their story wasn't finished, not by a long shot. But one thing was clear: neither of them would ever be the same again. Emily stared at the message on her phone, her heart racing. Who could it be? The text didn't just hint at a secret, it hinted at something bigger, something still hidden. For a moment, the kindness she had shown that rainy afternoon felt like a distant memory, replaced by uncertainty and fear. But then she took a deep breath and looked up at Daniel. "I don't know who sent that," she said quietly, "but I do know this. We can't let fear stop us. What you're trying to do, it matters. People like me, people who got caught in the layoffs, we need a chance. Not just for a paycheck, but for respect." Daniel nodded, relief washing over his face. "You're right. This isn't just about business anymore. It's about people, about making sure no one else gets left behind like you were." Over the next few days, Daniel and Emily began working together, sharing her story with the company's leadership and the board. Emily's first-hand experience brought a new perspective that no report or statistic could capture. Slowly, the company started to listen, promising changes to how layoffs were handled, introducing better support programs, and pledging to treat employees with dignity. Emily even received a job offer, not in the corporate world she once feared, but as a community liaison, someone who could help bridge the gap between employees and management. It wasn't the career she had dreamed of before, but it felt meaningful. It felt like a fresh start. The stranded family. They found a way home, thanks to the kindness of strangers in the small town, and to Emily's help arranging a ride and some essentials before they left. The memory of that rainy day stayed with her, a reminder of how small acts can ripple far beyond what we expect. As for the mysterious message, it remained unanswered. But Emily decided not to dwell on it. Some things, she realized, are best faced when the time is right. For now, she focused on rebuilding her life, empowered by the idea that even in the darkest moments, kindness and courage can light the way. Looking back, Emily understood that being fired wasn't the end. It was a turning point. And sometimes, the people who seem to hold power aren't so different from those who serve coffee in a diner. What matters is what we do with the chances we're given. The story of the struggling waitress who paid for a stranded family's meal, unaware of the CEO she helped, became more than just a surprising twist. It became a story about humanity, redemption, and hope. And maybe, just maybe, a reminder that sometimes the hardest moments lead to the most unexpected new beginnings.